So to introduce our speaker today, our speaker is Dom Nozzi. Dom is a certified planner. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental science and a master's degree in planning from Florida State. He has been an associate planner and senior planner for the city of Gainesville since 1986, and briefly the growth rate control planner for Boulder, Colorado. He has authored several environmental, transportation, and urban design plans and regulations for Gainesville. He's in Who's Who for the South and Southwest. His most recent book is The Road to Ruin, An Introduction to Sprawl and How to Cure It. He is working on a second book about transportation planning, cities, and the quality of life, and it is tentatively titled The Car is the Enemy of the City. And that's expected to come out in the next year. So with no further ado, let me introduce Dom Nozzi.
I want to start by saying how excited I am to be here to speak to you tonight, partly because about a year or so ago, my former employer, the city of Gainesville, Florida, issued an edict that said that Dom Nozzi shall not deliver these controversial speeches within 100 miles of the city of Gainesville. So I want to warn you that some of these views are perhaps rather dangerous and subversive. So I hope we're all ready for what I have to say tonight. Okay, to start off, transportation delivers us, or is the beginning of what our future will be in terms of sprawl and quality of life and environmental conservation for our communities. Okay, so when we establish our transportation plans and we lay our transportation system out in our community, we're essentially locking ourselves into a future of suburban sprawl or compact development. We're locking ourselves into a quality of life and a level of environmental conservation. It all starts with transportation. A lot of people will argue that transportation follows land uses, that transportation is trying to accommodate the land uses decided upon. I largely believe that that's a nonsense position, that it's very important for us to know that transportation typically drives and determines land use, quality of life, and environmental conservation. I hope to demonstrate that tonight. Let's see, we have a problem here with the... Do we want to remove this guy?
We have to hit the right click or left. You can move the cursor to the next and just make sure you hit the button. It's a left click response. Okay.
All right.
Roll it down.
I don't seem to be active. Ah. Okay, this is one example of how transportation really determines land uses. Okay, when you design a street for a modest speed, a low-speed street, 20 miles an hour, a shopping type street, but a street where you're driving to rather than driving through, okay, a low-speed design street delivers a certain kind of character. You've got a relatively large field of vision as a motorist. What ends up happening is you're more attentive, you're driving more safely and carefully at lower speeds. Therefore, building ornamentation is more relevant. It's more to be expected on a low-speed street because it makes sense, because motorists are better able to see the ornamentation, so building ornamentation tends to be more common on low-speed street systems. Okay? And you also tend to have more pedestrian activity because pedestrians tend to enjoy the safer, calmer experience of a low-speed street. Okay, these are the kinds of things you can expect in a low-speed design. As you start increasing your design speed for your street, you increasingly start seeing had a problem here, I guess. All right, maybe we have to have you do it for me. As we go to higher and higher speeds, we start seeing the field of vision shrink, okay? Ultimately, at high design speed, 50 miles an hour, we start seeing what's called a cellscape, okay? Now, increasingly, retailers along that street have to shout at us to get our attention because we're flying by so quickly. We only have a couple seconds to grab the attention of potential customers. That means that retailers are compelled to put in billboards, large signs, glaring lights, bright colors. It really doesn't matter too much what your regulations say, okay, in terms of controlling this kind of thing. Largely what's happening is that the design speed of the street is controlling what the character of the street is. Again, transportation determining land use. Walter Kulash, a traffic engineer heretic, works for Gladding Jackson, makes the point that, that when you build what he calls the 50-50 road, the road where you are designing for 50 miles an hour or thereabouts and 50,000 trips per day or thereabouts, you are locking yourself into strip commercial sprawl that no force on earth can prevent that corridor from becoming strip commercial once you develop the 50-50 road. Again, transportation determining land use and things like regulations having very little impact over the character of your street. It really is all starting with transportation. Nothing? Oh, we're still waiting? I learned something very surprising a while back. About 100 years ago, developers were looked upon as gods. They were admired. They were heroes of our communities. Almost every time a developer came in and proposed new development in our community, there was great celebration. People were really looking forward to it, because almost always when new development came in about 100 years ago, more perhaps, we knew that it was typically going to be improving our community. It was going to be helpful to our quality of life, and so developers were godlike. They were heroes for our communities. And we had scenes like this. When we developed, we see developers come in for a ribbon cutting. We had scenes like this. And many people from the community would come out to celebrate the great new building coming, right? You know, just a fantastic community outpouring of support for the development. And, of course, today, perhaps nothing can be more different. Developers are seen as evil black hats. They're bad guys. We have, in fact, are seeing the emergence of what I call a NIMBY epidemic. We have an epidemic of terminology we use to refer to people that don't like development in any way whatsoever. And so we have this growing number of terms that describe these kinds of people. And my personal favorite is the last one, okay? The last one is my personal favorite. So why on earth do we have this radical shift in how we look upon developers? They were godlike 100 years ago. Today, they're despised and feared and hated by many people in the community to the point where we had this epidemic. In my opinion, it's largely explained by this, okay? About 100 years ago, our design imperative was to design to make people happy. This was how we designed, to make people happy. That was our imperative. That's what we designed for primarily. Now, since then, over the past several decades, we've shifted our model. Now the design model says, we shall design to make cars happy first. Okay? This is what we get. The commercial corridors. Making cars happy delivers us these Anywhere USA corridors that no one can be proud of. There's no civic pride here. Okay? This is the outcome of designing to make cars happy, and I believe largely fuels this NIMBY epidemic, because increasingly people can understandably expect that new development will deliver car-happy design. Okay? not designed for making people happy, but car happy design, which is almost always awful for any nearby neighborhoods, okay? What ends up happening as a result of this is that we think and see like motorists. We look at new development plans or site plans. We're thinking, how is this development going to be for my Ford? We're not thinking about how it's going to be for little Bobby and Susie. We're thinking about how it's going to be for our Chevy, right? That's our focus. It's a zero-sum game. Oftentimes we think, you know, we can have win-win strategies. We can make everyone happy with this development. But in fact, almost always when we build to make cars happy, every form of travel loses. You make cars travel easier, you're going to make transit more difficult, pedestrian more difficult, and bicycling more difficult. Economists call it the barrier effect. You create barriers almost always when you build to make easier car access or easier car travel. You create barriers for all other forms of travel. Okay, it's a zero-sum game. Cars win, other forms of travel lose almost always. A big problem we have as well is there are clashing values in terms of what we're looking for and what cars are looking for. Cars want to see radically different things than people. Cars want big, high-speed roads. They want big, massive asphalt parking lots. They want large spacing, big dispersal, big sprawl of community, low-density communities. Okay? People almost always look for the opposite of that. People want compact, modest, human-scaled spacing. They really dislike high-speed roads. They prefer low-speed, modest, narrow streets. Okay? That's what people are looking for. And so we have clashing values. The tragic dilemma that's emerged over the past several decades is that we are breeding car cheerleaders. Over time, more and more people, understandably so, because that's the only way you can get around is by car increasingly. We have people cheerleading for cars increasingly, people going to city council meetings demanding their elected officials make conditions better for cars. The unintended consequence is that we become our own worst enemy. We unintentionally worsen our quality of life because by making cars happier, we're actually unintentionally lowering our quality of life. Okay? So we have this terrible, tragic reality, this terrible, tragic dilemma of unintentionally hurting our own quality of life when we call for better conditions for our cars. So what ends up happening is that we are motorists first and business people second. We are motorists first and Republicans and Democrats second. We are motorists first and environmentalists second. Everything comes after the car when we're in a car-based society. Everything is second to the car in terms of what we do and what we are concerned about. And as I said, there are clashing values. Okay, clashing values. Here I'm going to show you an example of contrasting shopping experiences. This is the shopping experiences that cars look for. Okay, the classic car shopping experience. And then conversely, this is the experience we can expect when we design for shopping for people. A radically different vision, a radically different experience. Okay, car values are radically different than people values. Big differences in habitat design for the two. Clashing values. Now, my message is not all about getting rid of cars. People often think that that's the case. My point is not getting rid of cars. My point is that we need to stop pampering cars to the extent that they dominate our world. Okay? It's very easy for cars to dominate our world if we pamper them. We must avoid pampering them because they very quickly dominate our world. As I said earlier, they cause zero-sum problems. They create barriers to other forms of travel. They can very easily dominate our world. So this is a tradition, this is a design tradition for streets that we have largely abandoned. A more complete street where you accommodate all forms of travel. As you can see, we're accommodating transit, we're accommodating pedestrians, we're accommodating bicyclists. On-street parking is really helpful for retail health, really healthy for pedestrian life. The buildings, as you can see, are behaving themselves. They're pulled up to they're butting up to the public sidewalk. They're forming an enclosed outdoor room. That kind of enclosure is a really pleasant experience for pedestrians. The sense of enclosure is really important. When you lose that enclosure with huge setbacks, buildings behind parking, for example, people feel exposed. It's a really unpleasant experience compared to the sense of enclosure you get with this human scale design and the street examples we're seeing here. And then, for example, again, contrastingly, this design making cars happy, the Anywhere USA street design experience, a really great place for high-speeding cars, inattentive motorists, unsafe travel, buildings starting to turn their back on the public realm, the streets and sidewalks, pulling themselves back from it because the street's becoming more hostile. Great place for cars, really unpleasant place for people. You tend not to see pedestrians here. This is the experience we can expect from making cars happy as our design imperative that we've been involved in for the past several decades. So when we go to improve the car habitat, there are things that inevitably happen. Number one is that inevitably the people habitat declines, as I was saying. Number two, indirectly from that, or what follows from that, is that the wildlife habitat also declines. Because what happens is that you harm your people habitat in your cities. That increases the market interest and pressure on people wanting to leave the city and to live in more peripheral locations in the community. They want to escape the low quality of life. They want to live in the sprawling locations more so than in the past. And that means that we increasingly steamroll those real important wildlife habitat areas in the periphery of our communities. So what happens indirectly is that improving car habitat results in declining people habitat, which results in declining wildlife habitat. Inevitable process. This is not an image of a German city just after being bombed in World War II. Okay? This is a recent image of Houston, Texas. Life is great for cars in downtown Houston. There's plenty of parking, plenty of places to park your cars. There's plenty of affordable housing for cars in downtown Houston. You know, there was a German architect that famously said once that putting a parking lot in your downtown is the same thing as putting a toilet in the middle of your living room. And this image, I think, really gives us an example of that. It's really an awful place to be if you're a person. You know, who wants to live in a place that's essentially a lunar landscape parking lot for cars? I'm sure Houston's got a lot of people fleeing to outlying areas because the downtown has just become an awful place to be. As many of you, I'm sure, know, in Europe, the private realm, the insides of homes, are pretty modest by our standards. Okay, pretty modest. Their private realm, compared to ours, is really modest. By comparison, the American public-private realm, insides of our homes, are palatial oftentimes. Even people that are lower in income, even lower income, more modest households have pretty nice insides on a world standard. But, I mean, it's just palatial what we have in the private realm in America. Now, by striking contrast, you look at the public realm, the streets and sidewalks and parks. In Europe, this is a scene of a major commercial street in Paris. Okay? Every day we were staying here in a hotel. Every morning we'd go out into the streets and we'd experience this fantastic experience of people smiling, being happy, friendly, sociable. Just a fabulous experience. The building ornamentation was spectacular. It was very festive. An enjoyable experience every morning awaited us in the public realm. And this public realm is an equal opportunity public realm. Everyone enjoys this quality of life because it's accessible to all of us, regardless of income or status, race, or your minority group or whatever. All people enjoy the public realm quality of life. By contrast, the American public realm is perhaps the most miserable in the developed world. Okay, this is the experience that we almost always have in our public realm in America. The streets, sidewalks, and parks are awful. People are fleeing from this. As anywhere USA, strip commercial design is just engulfing so many cities, leading to a huge decline in civic pride, and we flee from it, understandably. Okay, we start cocooning away from the public realm. We turn our backs to it, and we are missing something. I guess we'll just have to go without that. There's an image inside that sprawl, but it's not going to come up. We'll leave it. This is the traditional residential design pattern that we have abandoned since World War II. This happens to be my house, the house I used to own in Gainesville, Florida. It shows fairly well the walkable design that we've abandoned over the past several decades. What you'll see in this design is you'll see that the house is at a conversational distance from the public realm, the sidewalk. Easy to talk to people on the sidewalk and vice versa. Okay? People walking by on the sidewalk can interact with people on the porch. The house is close enough to give its energy to the public realm. It faces the public realm. The windows, the doors are facing. They're close enough so that there's energy given. back and forth. There's more citizen surveillance, so there's more citizen crime control that results naturally from the fact that people in houses can look out on the public realm and see if there's any problems that need to be reported, and vice versa. People on the sidewalk are close enough to be able to report on any problems experienced in the house. So there's citizen surveillance when you have this kind of traditional design. By contrast, you know, for several decades we've been doing this, designed to make cars happy. We had the situation where the protruding garage where the car lives forms what's known as a snout house, okay? There's probably no public realm here. There's probably no sidewalk in this kind of design, this suburban design, okay? Now, the garage is so prominent that what we have essentially, the message this building sends us is that a car lives here and the people live in an accessory unit out back, okay? That's what this tells us. And what kind of rewarding experience would you have if you walk by a place where you're essentially seeing the house turn its back to you? You know, there's nothing being given to the public realm here. It's all about the car. Anthropologists looking back, archaeologists looking back at the ruins of the American civilization will have no difficulty knowing what Americans were most concerned about. It will not be difficult for them to know what we're all about. Now, what happens is we're turning our backs so much that we're cocooning ourselves from the public realm. The public realm is so miserable that we cocoon ourselves, we turn our backs on it, and we start living vicarious lives. We become a nation of loners, okay? We start having vicarious friends through our television shows because we're abandoning the public realm where we normally would meet friends, engage in sociability. It's all vicarious increasingly, and it increasingly becomes a more empty, sterile life because there's really little you can experience in terms of sociability and sense of community by cocooning yourself inside your home and watching television all the time. Okay, and this is actually an unrealistic image because almost always we never really watch television even as a family. We usually watch alone or with one other person. So even this is kind of unrealistic in its images. This is an image of Gainesville, Florida's main post office, built about 100 years ago. A magnificent building, magnificent. It was the kind of building that I would take out-of-town guests to show off my city because it was such a magnificent building. It was so wonderful, really, really impressive building. You know, the columns, the masonry, it was just a fantastic building. By contrast, in recent years, this is the new main post office built in Gainesville a couple of years ago, okay? What has happened is that building ornamentation has become an expendable extravagance. We've fled from the public realm, and so now it's an extravagance to build buildings that have ornamentation that evoke civic pride. It's irrelevant to have the ornamentation, so we end up building things like this. What does this say about how much we respect our civic institutions? We build something like this compared to what we used to build 100 years ago. Okay? Let's look at the location of those buildings. This is the location of our post office in 1910. Terminating the vista. Terminating the vista sends the message that I am an important building. My government is important because I'm in a high visibility, important location, picturesque also, I might add, for tourists. But the termination of a vista sends the message that I'm important. By contrast, the more recent main post office the city built in the suburban sprawl location, peripheral location in the city, is in this kind of a scene. Okay, you can't even see the post office. It's in a hidden away location, the message being, you know, our civic institutions are trivial. We don't invest much in the way of pride or significance to our civic buildings. That's the message we get from our new post office location in Gainesville. The big issue for almost all of us is traffic congestion, right? That's the thing we almost always talk about and get most aggravated about. Real important for us when we start this conversation to know that trips have different values. There are different importance levels for different kinds of trips. We need to keep that in mind because we almost never keep that in mind. You know, at the one end, we have high-value trips, emergency trips to the hospital, our commute trips to work. Those are relatively high value. At the other end, the joy rides, the recreational drives, the impulse drives, those are relatively low value. You know, going to rent a video, driving across town and renting a video, those are low value, okay? The catastrophic, ruinous, unsustainable thing we've done over the past several decades is we've ignored the fact that their relative car trip values. We have spent hundreds of millions and billions of public dollars to assume that all those trips are equally high value. So we're spending all that public money to make sure that Bobby can drive across town at rush hour on a major street to rent a video. It's economically insane and totally unsustainable. But that is what we're doing, and we're bankrupting ourselves at all levels of government to make sure that Bobby can rent that video at rush hour. It's crazy, and we have to stop that. We have to acknowledge and design our streets to acknowledge the fact that there's differing values for different kinds of trips. Anthony Downs, an economist, really explains very clearly why, even in theory, we cannot build our way out of congestion. You know, you can't widen your way out of congestion. We always are saying that. We're always paying lip service to that. Anthony Downs says that even if you have infinite dollars, you cannot widen your way out of congestion. There are three things that inevitably happen when you, in this case, widen a road from 4 lanes to 6. First, you inevitably get the rush hour convergence when you widen. People converge back on rush hour because now the congested street is more free-flowing. So more people converge back on it who were previously avoiding it because of the congestion. They converge back on rush hour. They were driving at different times earlier. Now they're converging on rush hour again because now it's more free-flowing. Second form of convergence, inevitably, is that more people converge back on car travel. In the past with congestion, some people were saying, I'm not going to tolerate that, I'm going to walk or bicycle or use transit. Now with the widened road, they converge back in car travel. Also, the barrier effect means that the road widens, people are less able to walk or bicycle or use transit, so they're more compelled to use a car. So the second form of convergence that inevitably happens is that people converge back on more car travel. The third and final form of convergence is route change convergence. Some people avoided the congested road, they didn't tolerate it, and so they wanted to escape it by using different routes. But now with the widening, they converge back. Those people converge back on the newly widened road, and inevitably, you get the same level of congestion and fairly quickly to what you had before the widening. It's not possible to build a way out of congestion. I'll say that over and over again. So ultimately, what happens here, another way of looking at this, is that you have a congested 2-lane road. Okay? The default solution we always have for the congested road is to widen it. So we widen to a 4-lane road. What do we get? Almost overnight, we get a congested 4-lane road. All right? Then we widen again to avoid the congestion. We get a 6-lane congested road almost overnight. So when we widen, we're not essentially escaping congestion by widening. All we're really doing is saying, what form of, what flavor of congestion do you want? Do you want the 2-lane congestion flavor, the 4-lane congestion flavor, or the 6-lane congestion flavor? That's the only question we're answering when we decide when we widen the road to try to escape congestion. We're not escaping it, we're just deciding what flavor of congestion we want. How about 10 lanes? 10 lanes allow us to escape congestion? Apparently not. You know, we have for several decades failed to learn the lesson that we can't build our way out of congestion. We try over and over again. We spend hundreds of billions of public dollars to bankrupt ourselves, not learning the lesson that we can't build our way out of congestion. We simply cannot seem to learn the lesson. We are destroying ourselves. We're bankrupting ourselves. You know, recently, Atlanta, Georgia, has talked seriously about wanting to go to 23 lanes with their interstate. Atlanta says we can build our way out of congestion. I say they can't. Okay? You cannot build your way out of congestion. It's just theoretically impossible. There is a concept that's very important, travel time budget. Okay? Cross-culturally and throughout history, on average, people will travel about 1.1 hours to and from work or school or whatever they do on a daily basis, on average. Some do more, some do less, but on average, 1.1 hours is the amount of travel time we allocate on a daily basis. You know, even back in the Stone Age, when people were hunting for mastodon, they had the travel time budget at 1.1 hours, apparently. So we're apparently hardwired as a species to have this travel time budget. What this means, importantly for us tonight, is that with a slow-speed walking type of transportation system, for example, people live closer as a community. The community is more compact because the community needs to be within the 1.1 hour equilibrium point for travel. As the system speeds up, as the community's transportation speeds up with things like bigger highways, people live further away. There's more sprawl. People are getting back to the equilibrium of 1.1 hours. Again, transportation driving sprawl. Travel time budget is a very important concept that we should keep in mind.
Is that round trip or?
That's round trip, there and back. So, what we end up with, again, another way of illustrating this concept, a two-lane community largely based on two-lane roads will largely have whatever, abstract size community. As we start widening to 4 lanes, we start moving more into a 4-lane type community. Again, we're not escaping sprawl, congestion. What we're doing is we're saying we're going to be a bigger community. That's all we're doing with building bigger roads. And again, going to 6 lanes, we're not escaping congestion by building 6-lane roads in our community. We're just building a bigger community because people are getting back to that 1.1 hour travel time budget. Okay? The equilibrium point is growing as we build bigger and bigger roads. Crucial to keep this in mind. Congestion regulates itself. Okay? Congestion does not get infinitely worse if we don't widen. We often think, mistakenly, that if we don't widen, the congestion will get worse and worse every week. Every week, one week it'll be a half-mile backup. The next week it'll be a mile backup. The next week it'll be a mile-and-a-half backup, and on forever. We believe that congestion will get infinitely worse. In fact, congestion regulates itself because some people have a certain tolerance level for congestion. They say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore, and I'm going to do something else. I'm going to live closer. I'm going to travel a different way. I'm going to travel at non-rush hour times. Congestion regulates itself, but when we widen to escape the congestion, we short-circuit the self-regulation. Okay? We must avoid widening as a solution to congestion because congestion will regulate itself. We have to keep that in mind. We often fail to realize that. We often think congestion will result in intolerable gridlock. It'll get worse and worse and worse, and that's just not true. Congestion regulates itself. I understand this word is not as commonly used here as it is in Florida, but in Florida, traffic engineers will often say if you don't widen your road, you will have a failed road. Okay? A very inflammatory term that suggests that the world's going to come to an end. People are going to die if you don't widen the road. It sounds catastrophic, and people hear that and they think, well, we must widen. I mean, what else can we do? It's going to be a disaster if we don't widen it. We can't have failed roads. It sounds like hundreds of people will die. What they're not telling us is that the failed road really means that we're going to get maybe a couple more minutes of delay. It's not a catastrophe. It's just more delay is what the failed road really means, but that's not what the failed road term suggests. The failed road term suggests catastrophe, and that's precisely what traffic engineers often leverage to have the community do whatever they can to escape the congestion by widening. We'll have failed road if we don't widen. So be very careful if that kind of term is used. One thing that I tend to say more and more in public, I tended not to say much in public in the past, is that in cities, traffic congestion is our friend. There are a lot of things that inevitably happen with congestion that are good for us as a community, that people respond to congestion in ways that are good for the community. And I'll give you an example, several examples of why that's the case. First, with congestion, some people are more willing to live in mixed-use, compact, higher-density development, in-town development. They're more willing to do that because they want to escape some of the congestion, so we see more people that want to live that way, which is good for the community. We have less sprawl with traffic congestion because now, with congestion, you have what's called a time tax. People have to pay a time tax in congestion. They have to get delayed. They're paying with their time. Time tax means people need to live closer to get back to that 1.1 hour travel time budget. So traffic congestion results in less sprawl. There is less, on a regional basis, and this is something that we almost always fail to understand or see. We think the opposite. Oftentimes they justify road widenings to say that road widenings will result in less gas consumption, less air pollution. On a regional basis, road widening causes more air pollution and more gasoline consumption. Okay, traffic congestion results in less air pollution and less gas consumption because what happens with congestion is that we start shaving off the more low-value car trips. Okay, the bobbies are doing less travels to the video stores to rent the videos in congestion. And so the low-value trips start going away, Overall, on the regional basis, you have less gas consumption, less air pollution as a result of congestion. So it's really not the case that congestion on a regional basis causes more air pollution and more gasoline consumption. So be very careful about that argument. One of the biggest sources, if not the biggest source of noise pollution in cities is car travel. Okay, a huge problem in cities and quality of life is noise pollution, and the biggest source almost always is car travel. As cars move faster, there's much more noise pollution. Traffic congestion slows down car speeds, therefore results in less noise pollution in cities. Traffic congestion also reduces the severity of car crashes. At lower speeds, the car crashes are less severe. We also, as I said earlier, we also tend to see better transit, bicycle, and walking facilities, partly because the level of citizen discontent rises dramatically with traffic congestion. People can't stand it. They go screaming and yelling at their elected officials saying they must do something. One of the things that's often done, especially in bigger cities with a lot of congestion, is they start building better facilities, transit facilities, bicycle facilities, and walking facilities to respond to the congestion. So the congestion, again, delivering something beneficial for our community. Another beneficial aspect is that there is more non-car travel with congestion, because that's one way to escape congestion is to escape your car. Again, a benefit of congestion. More healthy housing and local retail. Okay? Large big box retail benefits from a lack of congestion because they need to serve a regional consumer shed. Congestion makes it more difficult. Congestion is better for compact, higher density, infill residential development, which is beneficial to small, locally owned businesses. Okay? Also, housing, of course, is going to be improved with congestion because now there's less likely a desire to flee the city. There's more of a desire to come in and live closer in town, higher density residential to cope with the congestion. So housing actually improves with congestion. This is a concept that I really try to emphasize in my forthcoming book, the crucial importance of controlling size for quality of life for a city. Very, very important that we control size for quality of life. David Money agrees and makes that point. It's essential for urban designers to control size for quality of life. It's really the key way for us to have a quality human habitat in cities is to control size. This is a series of images that helps us to understand the size problem. This is what 40 people on bicycles and on foot walking on the sidewalk look like. 40 people on bicycles and on foot. This is what 40 people look like on a bus. This is 40 people sitting in chairs. And this is 40 people in cars. Okay? Complete gridlock. I want to dwell on this for a few minutes. There are some important issues here. First of all, it really puzzles me as a city planner to often hear people say that the density proposed in this project is intolerably high. It's crazy. It's too many people. It's just awful. It'll cause all kinds of problems. This density is way, way too high. And it puzzles me because when I go to Europe, I see densities that are much higher than what's proposed here in America. And the development's often quite nice, quite pleasant. And so I'm thinking to myself, why is there such huge, huge opposition to even low densities here in America? I think these images help us understand that. All right? What's happening is that it's not so much that we have too many people, it's that we have too many people in cars. Now, on average, a person sitting in a car takes up 17 times as much space as a person sitting in a chair. That's an enormous consumption of land. About 300 square feet of land is needed for a parking space. That's a lot of city land to be providing for each individual in a car. A lot of land, a huge amount of space consumption by cars. The gigantism disease is a disease that I believe is really one of the most powerful ways in which cities in America are dying. The gigantism disease is more than anything else, I think, destroying human habitat, quality human habitat. And let's see some examples of what I mean by gigantism. Cars consume so much space that they're creating these massive structures that dwarf us as humans. We feel like little tiny ants and insignificant specks of life when we stand up next to these monstrous facilities being used to accommodate the big cars. Okay, just massive, massive gigantism problems that are destroying the human habitat. Okay, you know, and I'll say one thing about this too, that as we expand the car habitat, the human habitat shrinks. Okay, and this is a great example of that. The human habitat shrinking when we build these monster, gigantic facilities. We also have monstrous geographic sizes for our communities. The suburban sprawl endlessly moving in all directions, creating endless residential sprawl in all directions. The size, geographic size of communities is also very important for quality of life and the gigantism disease. Do cities need more open space? I often hear this. I often hear people say the solution to better cities is we want more open space. That'll make our city better. More open space, more open spaces. I hear that all over and over again. I hear it as a mantra. More open space. Let's look at this. Let's look at this and see that, you know, it seems to me like in the suburban sprawl locations, we've got plenty of open space. But almost all that open space is being used up by cars. You know, roads and parking is where all the open space is in our cities. When we look at some contrasting images of other cities, modest sizing, modest human scaled spacing, modest sizes. I argue that almost always cities need less open space, not more. We need less open space for quality of life. To improve the quality of life of cities, almost always we want to reduce sizes, not more open space. We want less open space and creating these fantastically wonderful, charming, romantic, human-scaled spaces in our cities. Forgiving car street design. For several decades now, we've been designing what's known as the forgiving street, the street in which traffic engineers are seeing people crash into trees. They crash into parked cars, on-street parked cars, sometimes into buildings. And the common sense solution for those traffic engineers is to remove those obstacles. That'll reduce crashes, right? Seems like common sense. What happens unintentionally, though, is that we remove those things, and what we're doing is we're forgiving people for high-speed, inattentive driving. Okay, they drive off the road because they're driving too fast or too recklessly, and we forgive them by having all those obstacles removed. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know the result of what will happen. We make it easier to drive recklessly and at high speeds and inattentively because now the consequences are less. So guess what? We have more reckless driving, more speeding, more inattentiveness, you know, more cell phone use, more makeup going on while we're driving because we can get away with it on the forgiving road. So the forgiving road, unintentionally, surprisingly perhaps, gives us less safe roads because we can get away with driving less safely, more recklessly, more inattentively. The forgiving road also creates a false sense of security. We think we can get away with driving without paying attention or driving at high speeds, and so we do. We have a false sense of security that we are immune to crashes, more so than in the past. It also breeds lower skilled driving skills. Our driving skills are declining in America because of the forgiving road paradigm. People are less skilled in driving because they need less skills to drive without crashing, so they can pay attention less, they are less skilled, or there's a downward spiral in American driving skills. Important for us to contrast between fire safety and life safety. Oftentimes fire engineers will say, we need wider roads because we want to have quicker response times to fires to save lives in fires. Well, studies show that the number of injuries and deaths that are caused by car crashes is much higher than the number of injuries and deaths from fires. So what happens is that we widen roads to increase fire response times to save lives. We actually see a net reduction overall in community injuries and deaths because now more people on the wider, higher speed roads are getting into car crashes causing injuries and deaths than are being saved by faster response times by fires, by fire trucks getting to fires faster. That's overwhelmed by the increase in crashes and deaths caused by wider, higher speed roads. So it's crucial that we keep in mind that the community focus needs to be on the broader umbrella of life safety and not the small subset of fire safety if we want as an objective to reduce overall deaths and injuries in our communities. Life safety is more encompassing and oftentimes means that we're not going to want to widen the roads because we need to maximize our health and safety, and the big way to do that in most cases is to keep our roads modest in size, keep our streets low speed, keep attentive motorist driving behavior. This is an example of the forgiving street paradigm. This is what we see almost always. This is what's delivered to us in the forgiving street design. The big wide roads, the big forgiving high-speed roads, encouraging a lot of inattentive driving, very unsafe place to be, despite what we thought initially when we built these kinds of roads for more safety. So what I argue for is we need to design roads to obligate attentiveness. Attentive roads is the road to better design safety. Better safety with more attentiveness. Don't forgive people for driving recklessly or too high speed. Okay? Now, a guy by the name of Hans Monderman, a traffic engineer, Dutch traffic engineer, is making the point around the country these days that he's finding that it's important for us to move more in the direction of what he calls naked streets. He believes naked streets are more safe. One way he does that is he says, let's remove some of these cautionary signs we have on the sides of roads that are giving us a false sense of security. He says that the cautionary signs need to be removed to give the motorist more of a need to pay attention and drive slower, to not create this sense that things are going to be forgiven, or that things are under control and safety is being watched out for. The signs deliver that kind of message. So he recommends that we remove the clutter of safety signs. He also recommends, by the way, that we start removing the striping on streets. We start removing things like traffic signals, crosswalks. He argues that those things are all reducing motorist attentiveness. And to have better safety, you want more motorist attentiveness. And safety features on roads actually reduce motorist attentiveness, which increases safety problems. Instead, we need more in the way of traffic calming and street friction. We need to obligate motorists to drive more slowly and therefore more attentively. They have to pay attention more so than the forgiving design. They're forced to pay attention because the road is more constrained, it's more narrow, there's more friction, and the motorist has to pay attention much more so, therefore more safety. Now, one of the things that's really bothered me in recent years is I've really come to find that despite all I believed in grad school, public sector planners like myself are really part of the problem. And I'm really tired of being part of the problem, and a lot of it is just that the local land development regulations that I'm asked to implement or enforce as a city planner are actually in opposition to smart growth. Just on and on, a huge number of ways in which land development regulations for almost all communities have a large set of things that are in opposition to smart growth. You know, I mean, we have met the enemy, and he or she is us. And let me give you some examples. First, to define smart growth, I would define it quickly as transportation and lifestyle choices, compact development, you know, a pretty standard way to define smart growth. The conventional wisdom says that developers are the ones that oppose smart growth. They're the bad guys. They oppose smart growth. It's the government that we need to enforce smart growth, right? Well, guess what? Sometimes, or increasingly, developers get it. And what happens? They often find that they want to do smart growth, and there are all these regulations that are standing in their way. They can't do the smart growth because the local government regulations are saying you can't do the smart growth stuff. We're going to stop you. And it's astonishing to me as a city planner. You know, I thought to myself, you know, I'm in a position, I'm a public sector planner, I'm a public servant. My job is to improve the community quality of life, and yet here I am trying to stop this guy who wants to do what I can see is smart growth. The regulations insist that I do that. It's just unbelievable. And so these are some examples of ways in which communities commonly will be opposed or an obstacle to smart growth. Very commonly, local government development regulations will set residential density caps on new residential development, oftentimes inappropriately low in locations where we should have higher densities, particularly in-town densities or downtown densities should be higher than they often are based on the density caps we have in land development regulations in our communities. Also, and this is really, really important, perhaps the biggest way in which local government regulations are an impediment to smart growth is that very often local communities require parking, often excessive amounts of parking, and it's just totally incompatible with smart growth because, as Donald Shoup has once said, or actually as I've said in following Donald Shoup, Parking requirements by local governments are a fertility drug for cars. Okay? They're practically begging us to drive a car when we provide all that free and abundant parking. You know, we're talking about trying to encourage transportation choices and trying to encourage less single-occupant car travel, yet governments requiring all this free and abundant parking is doing the exact opposite. We're begging people to drive alone. We require all this excessive parking on the part of developers. I often say, you know, if I'm a business person, I'm not going to cut my own throat by providing too little parking. The problem, in my opinion, these days is not that developers will provide too little parking. The problem these days is that developers will provide too much parking. And so what I was successfully able to do in Gainesville is set parking caps, not parking floors. I was able to say to Gainesville, let's set a maximum for the parking that can be provided. You can provide 0 to a maximum instead of what almost all communities say, and that is you must provide at least this number, if not more. I'm saying let's go in the opposite direction. Set a maximum instead of a minimum. Crucial for smart growth. Crucial, crucial, crucial. Mixed use and granny flats, very commonly not allowed by community regulations. Very commonly not allowed. Very important for smart growth. Okay? Granny flats being accessory dwelling units. Very important, very commonly not allowed. Oftentimes, big and dangerous roads are required by our regulations, by our standards, by our traffic engineers. In fact, the much more charming, safer, romantic, walkable, narrow streets are almost impossible to do based on regulations, based on standards. They're often illegal. Smart growth is opposed by our road standards as well. Another form of walkability improvements is to see the creation of smaller, narrower lots. The more doors and windows you have, especially the more doors you have, the more vibrant and active your sidewalks are, because there's more energy being given to the sidewalk with more doors. So your narrower lots actually create more activated sidewalks. Oftentimes, government regulations say you must have a minimum of certain residential lot width, which often is pretty wide. And developers coming in wanting to say they want more narrow, more affordable lots are not able to do so because of local government regulations. Small setbacks are very commonly not allowed by local governments. You know, local governments say you must set back at least 30 feet back from the public right-of-way. And oftentimes, or sometimes, developers who get it want to be closer. They're not allowed to. Closer means more walkable, more smart growth design. In fact, what I was able to do to some extent in Gainesville was say, let's do the reverse. Let's say we have a build-to line instead of a setback line. You must build up to this line. You can't be further back than this line. You must be this close or closer, instead of you must be this far back or further. Oftentimes, public sector school board standards say schools must have large ball fields. Okay? It's often a nationally based standard. What that often means is that you can't fit minimum-sized schools in neighborhood-based. You cannot have neighborhood-based schools because there's such a big requirement for big ball fields in the public schools, and so we're actually unintentionally chasing public schools out of neighborhoods because neighborhoods often can't fit in those larger-sized lots needed for the ball fields. Storm basins also create a similar problem with walkability in the sense that storm basins are often inappropriately located in front of buildings or at intersections, which really reduces walkability. Location of storm basins is really important for us to be careful about to create more walkable design for our sites. A big problem that Florida has is we require in our growth management laws that there be concurrency for things like parks and sewers and, most importantly, roads. Road concurrency is perhaps the only concurrency measure that matters in Florida. What we've done is we've essentially said that our growth management laws, despite our intentions, our growth management laws are going to powerfully fuel suburban sprawl because road concurrency says your new development must be concurrent with road capacity. If your new development is going to give us new car trips that reduce our road capacity or reduce our free-flowing traffic conditions or increase congestion, if you don't have capacity on roads concurrent with your new development, we're not going to allow you. Well, guess what? Almost all of our available road capacity is in sprawl locations. It's not downtown, it's in sprawl locations. And so what the road concurrency rule says is we're going to encourage you to be in sprawl locations because that's where you find the road concurrency. So Florida growth management laws is a powerful force for promoting suburban sprawl. In fact, a lot of cities like Gainesville have to get special permission from the state of Florida to exempt ourselves from road concurrency to promote compact development and discourage sprawl. We have to exempt ourselves from road concurrency. So this is a big problem. This is a story about three friends, Billy, Bobby, and Jeff. Billy lives about 150 feet as the crow flies from his friends Jeff and Bobby. Okay? But if he wants to go visit his friends, he's often, in today's world, he's often going to have to face no trespassing signs or razor wire or fencing or even moats filled with crocodiles, right? I mean, he's probably not going to be able to walk directly to see his friend. In fact, what often has to happen is that Billy's going to have to, use the road system to get to his friend Bobby. He'll have to go up to approximately, I think it's a half mile in this case, to go see his friend Bobby. Well, if he wants to go see his friend Jeff, it's much, much worse. Then he's got to get out on these peripheral roads to the left and then top of the screen, then coming down to see his friend. Oh, thanks. That'll be very helpful. Yeah, he's going to come down over on that diagonal road. These are high-speed, high-capacity roads, by the way. Very dangerous high-speed roads. These are arterials. Okay? The trip to see his friend Jeff is 1.5 miles. Okay? How many parents here are going to want to have their kid ride a bicycle on those high-speed arterials to go see his friend Jeff a mile and a half away? Probably no one. So what ends up happening is that Bobby's mother becomes taxi driver mom. She becomes a taxi driver for her son Billy. Billy loses his travel independence in the disconnected cul-de-sac suburban street design. Okay? And they did a study in Vermont and Southern California, perhaps a poster child for sprawl, Southern California. They compare those two places. In Vermont, they found that kids are able to go to 3 times as many places on their own as the kids in Southern California. They found, conversely, and probably correlation, they found that, on the other hand, the kids in Southern California compared to kids in Vermont watched 4 times as much television. They're much more likely to cocoon themselves in their houses, probably because they can't travel on their own. So they're stuck in their houses.
Any data on how much the kids weigh in Southern California?
No, but I've seen some information like that. Not with kids though. This is a schematic showing concept of connected streets. This first one is origin A, destination B, one route choice. This is the cul-de-sac pattern. One route choice, A to B. The second illustration is 2 choices from A to B. This next one is 3 choices, 3 route choices from A to B. And finally, 6 choices from A to B. Okay? This is a traditional connected street grid of 10 by 10 roads from A to B. Can anyone here take a guess as to how many route choices you have between A and B in this diagram? Just call it out. Guesses as to how many route choices? 100? 50,000. Okay? There are, in fact, 184,000 route choices between A and B. 184,000. This is a very well-ventilated street pattern that we've abandoned. The connected grid street pattern is what we used to develop in our communities, and we've abandoned that. One of the results is traffic congestion, because 184,000 trip choices means that it's very, very difficult to congest this road pattern. There's a huge number of different choices you have if you face congestion. You have 183,999 other options if one of your routes is congested. Very well ventilated, very difficult to congest the connected street pattern. Unintended consequence of disconnecting your streets. As you go from the top of the diagrams to the bottom, you get more and more disconnection. Okay? On the right side, we see the results of these various levels of connectivity. At the highest level of connectivity, you can provide the most modest number of car travel lanes in your road pattern. As you get to more disconnected street patterns, you get larger number of lanes that you must provide, and ultimately, you get even larger number of road lanes that you have to provide in your roads when you really disconnect your street patterns. Because what's happening with disconnected streets is you're putting more and more of your trips on fewer and fewer roads. That means those roads must be bigger and bigger to accommodate the trips, because there's fewer roads that are handling the car trips. Therefore, an unintended consequence of disconnecting roads, building cul-de-sacs, is the roads must be bigger. The roads can be smaller if you have connected street patterns. Dan Bird, one of your speakers in the near future, makes a really good point about what's going on here. You know, cars are really happy when there aren't any cars around, and people are actually rather happy when there are people around, because we're sociable as a species. We like other people being around. It's really a pleasant, festive, sociable experience, friendly experience. And again, you know, clashing values, clashing habitat interests between cars and people. Parking, I'm going to dwell on this for a bit. Downtown parking, do we have too much parking? Too little parking is almost always what we believe. You know, our downtown doesn't have enough parking. There's a parking shortage. We need to provide more parking. Or do we have too much parking? Okay? Let's look at that question. The first question should not be necessarily, how do we provide more parking? The first question we have with parking as a problem is the question of what our community vision is. That's the question we have to start with, because then we get different answers than an inappropriate first question of how do we provide more parking. That's not the obvious first question if we perceive a parking problem or a parking shortage. We have to ask the right questions first. And in this case, the first question that's appropriate is, what is our community vision? Is this our vision? If so, then maybe it is true that we should just provide more parking. Okay? If this is our vision, this is what we provide. Or what about this? If this is our vision, then maybe we have different things we should be doing in terms of parking. Maybe it's not so much providing more parking. Maybe it's things like looking at the efficiency of the parking we have already. Almost all cities use parking inefficiently. They don't share it enough. They don't price it properly. There's too much free parking. There's too much underpriced parking. And so the parking tends to be used inefficiently. It's not that there's insufficient parking. It's that the parking is inefficiently provided. And so oftentimes, you want to achieve the human high quality of life habitat. The strategy is not so much providing more parking. The strategy is, let's use parking efficiently. The keys for a healthy downtown, there are a couple. First, agglomeration economies. Cities, to be healthy, need agglomeration. They need clustering. They need clumping. They need compactness. They thrive when there is more agglomerating, more businesses closer together, more residences closer together. That's what makes downtowns healthy. Okay? To be competitive, downtowns need to leverage their strengths. The primary strength that downtown has, the competitive leverage downtown has over suburban America, is compact, walkable charm. That's what the competitive leverage can be for a downtown. The downtown can always, well, not always, but the downtown can successfully compete against the suburbs by leveraging compact walkability. It can never outcompete the suburbs on parking. It can never outcompete by providing more parking, more free parking than the suburbs. The suburbs are always going to win that competitive battle. It's always going to be a competitive mistake for downtowns to try to compete with suburbs on suburban terms. Downtown needs to compete based on its own terms. What ends up resulting in consequence of this is, as I will often say, there is perhaps nothing more detrimental to a downtown than surface parking, especially free surface parking, off-street surface parking, that is. Nothing more deadly than that. The off-street surface parking creates gap-toothed dead zones in a downtown, and it really harms walkability, the competitive leverage. It harms walkability. It also really hurts agglomeration economies. To provide big surface parking lots means you're dispersing your downtown and really hurting downtown health. Big roads and big parking disperse downtowns. Okay, people can live further away. People want to live further away because you've got this more awful quality of life in your cities, and so people are dispersing. There's lower densities. Again, harmful for the health of downtown. Big roads and big parking disperse, causing real health problems for a downtown. Transit, attentive slow-speed roads, and efficient parking attract. They provide health to a downtown. They create agglomeration economies inherently. Okay? Transit attracts, compacts, infills, clusters, compacts. The downtown competitive leverage, a good visual example contrasting what I'm talking about. The competitive leverage is the image on the left. Okay, the compact, walkable, charming kind of ambiance. The image on the right is the suburban, plenty of free parking design. Downtown, the downtowns are never going to outcompete the big box retailer on provision of parking. Okay, downtown competitive leverage is compact walkability. Keep that in mind when you talk about downtown parking needs. All right, tactics. What are the tactics regarding parking? First, minimize, as I just said, minimize the amount of off-street, especially free off-street parking you have in your cities, especially downtown. Downtown surface parking is deadly. On-street parking, by contrast, must be maximized. You must provide as much as you can. Okay? The on-street parking, properly priced, is going to create a layer of protection for pedestrians. Therefore, it's a more safe, comfortable, pleasant place to be on the sidewalks. They slow down cars because they create more friction on streets, so cars are forced to drive more attentively and therefore safer. Retail is also very benefited by on-street parking because it's so easy and high quality to have on-street parking. People like the ability to run in and out of stores quickly, which on-street parking allows. Garages don't allow, or off-street surface parking lot doesn't really allow run in, run out consumer activity the way that on-street parking does. So it's really helpful for smaller retail to have on-street parking. Donald Shute makes the point that you need to properly price your on-street parking so you achieve about 15% vacancy on an ongoing basis with your pricing. That's really important because you want to create the perception that there's available parking in your downtown. The biggest discouragement for motorists coming downtown is the perception there's no parking downtown. And so what Shoup recommends is that you maintain a perception there's available parking downtown. It's much more discouraging for a motorist to believe there's no parking downtown than to see the parking is priced with parking meters. Parking meters are less discouraging than the perception there's no parking. Okay, so parking meters often are claimed to discourage motorists. I say motorists are much more discouraged by the perception of lack of parking. So motorists, parking, on-street parking needs to be properly priced to create the perception of available parking. One real effective strategy is that downtowns are really benefited when cities own and operate a downtown parking garage and lease spaces in that garage. And by the way, garages are really beneficial for parking in the sense that they really reduce the amount of the footprint taken up or consumed by parking. Parking consumes a lot of space. Parking garages reduce that footprint that's consumed by parking because it's vertically stacked. And so downtowns really benefit if parking has to be provided by having parking garages that stack the parking and therefore use less downtown space. Also very important that that garage be wrapped with active retail activity and residential activity so you have not a dead zone in your building, but a building that's active and alive. So you got to be sure that you wrap your parking with active uses. Okay? Also, what this does is that it allows the city to provide a lot of shared parking. People can lease spaces and not have to build their own spaces. If they have a compact site, it's often going to be really costly for them to have to provide their own parking. This gives them an option to get the parking elsewhere instead of at their own site. Another way for developers who don't have much in the way of space for their downtown site is to pay a fee in lieu of the parking. Instead of providing the parking, they can pay a fee instead. Those revenues then go to the city government, where the city government uses those dollars to build its municipal parking garages or whatever is being provided by local government in terms of parking, as a way to mitigate for the developer not providing their own parking. You have them pay a fee instead of forcing them to pay or having them provide what I'm calling detrimental parking on their own site, reducing walkability. Really important tactic, when you have parking meters and getting parking meter revenue, it's really important tactically that the revenue be dedicated to downtown. Very often, the parking meter revenue is dispersed throughout the community. But if you dedicate it, as Donald Shoup would say, if you dedicate that revenue to downtown, you have a constituency of downtown businesses that say, yes, it's benefiting my business that this revenue is going to improve the streets and the landscaping and the streetscaping near my business. You're fixing things, you're cleaning things with that revenue. I therefore are now increasingly supportive of these parking meters, and I want more parking meters for my business and near my business, because I could see it's benefiting us and not everyone in the city. So tactically, it's real important for you, if you want political support for parking meters, which I'm arguing are really important, that you make sure those revenues are dedicated to the downtown. Real important tactically to do that. You must exempt downtown parking for businesses. You must allow businesses downtown to expand without having to provide more parking. I purposely provided this illustration to give you a symbol of what America is doing to itself. This is one of the great historic sites in our history. This is the site where religious freedom documents were first signed in America. What is it today? What is one of the most important sites in American history today? A surface parking lot in Richmond, Virginia. What does that say about us? One of the most important sites in our history is now an asphalt parking lot. We really need to do what we can to have businesses downtown share their parking, because oftentimes they stagger in terms of what the parking needs are throughout the day. For example, a more obvious example is downtown church. Downtown church often doesn't need parking during the week, during the day. But downtown businesses often do. And so downtown nearby businesses should be able to share the parking with churches so that the parking is used more efficiently and not just used for the individual business itself. A lot of businesses, like movie theaters, only need parking at night, usually. And therefore, they can be sharing those spaces with nearby businesses during the day. Sharing parking is real important for minimizing the amount of parking provided downtown. Crucial, crucial, crucial. You must unbundle the price of parking from the price of the housing. Okay? We almost always insist that the price be bundled. That is, we provide housing and the parking is included in that price. We don't give people the choice of saying, you can have this housing unit for less money if you agree not to have parking or not to have 2 spaces, you only want 1 space, we're going to charge you less for this housing. We don't give you that choice usually. Instead, we say you must pay more for all this parking we provide. We're bundling the parking into the price of this housing. And so therefore, by bundling, we actually reduce housing affordability, because the housing price includes that for the price of the housing, and it's much more progressive and much more in the way of affordable housing provided if you unbundle. If you say your housing can be provided without the cost of the parking, you can have the option of not opting for the parking. So unbundling the parking is a very helpful tool, very effective way to reduce excessive amounts of parking that people sometimes, especially poor people, often don't need as much as more wealthy people. But why do we require them to pay for that parking? What can downtowns that employ these tactics expect? First, revitalize and increased housing. Okay? You have more housing when you have better quality of life in your downtown, because you've got less dead zones, less gap-toothed dead zones with all the surface parking that you're no longer providing. You've got better quality of life, therefore housing market is stronger in your downtown. It's a better place to be because you've got less asphalt lunar landscapes. You have improved retail because now it's less costly for you to have a retail shop. You don't have to provide as much parking. much less costly for you as a retailer if you don't have to provide as much parking. In fact, Shoup talks about how free parking is not really free. There's actually a high cost associated with free parking. The parking cost is often hidden in things like goods and services we buy. You know, the space provided by the business for parking is not free for that business person. It's going to be charged to you when you go buy a product or buy a service from that business. They're charging you more because of the price they had to pay for the parking. They charge you less if they don't have to provide as much parking space. And as I just said, you have more affordable prices if you don't require so much parking in the part of businesses. Parking pricing, I guess I already went over this. I beat that one to death. Let's go past that one. You have a higher quality of life with less parking. You know, less of your downtown consumed by parking, you got a higher quality of life in your parking. I just talked about that. So again, the common question is, how can we provide more parking? That's the common question we first ask when we think we have a parking problem. I'm making the point that no, our first question must be, what is the downtown vision? Is it what we want to, is our vision what's above, or is our vision what's below? If our vision is what's below, which I think is commonly the case, we want to see that we use parking more efficiently. What is to be done? I'm getting close to wrapping up here. I know this is difficult, I know this is perhaps impossible sometimes, but we need to elect people with courage and vision. We need wise leaders, increasingly difficult to find, I know. We need the leadership to elect people who have the courage and the leadership skills to realize that sometimes when they engage in community strategies that they know will result in a better community, they know that oftentimes they will be creating, at least initially, they will be creating enemies, initially at least. And you need to have the leadership skills to recognize that, acknowledge that, and accept that. I often make the point that if you don't make enemies when you're doing something, you're really not doing anything. Okay? You need to realize that you're going to almost always make enemies when you do something meaningful, and you have to accept that as a leader. As I said earlier, local government is often a big opponent to smart growth, perhaps unintentionally, largely through our land development codes. Oftentimes that means perhaps we should just throw out our land development code and start all over again. Or we should at least reform it to create more choices for housing and transportation, because oftentimes our code is a one-size-fits-all document for standards. We have to create more in the way of choices for housing and transportation. I just said this, I just made this point. We need people to understand, staff and elected officials need to understand that one size does not fit all. Too often our land development regulations are saying everything, every part of our community will be one lifestyle, one design. Suburban design is the only choice we're offering. It's a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't really provide us with choices, doesn't really provide equity. Really helpful that if we want to educate citizens effectively, we need to do what we can to create on-the-ground models of what we believe to be a smart growth. The smart growth models on the ground tells a lot of people that, hey, this is possible here. I could see with my own eyes it's possible here. People enjoy this and like this. Developers see this and say, hey, this is more profitable. I'm going to do this even if government doesn't require it with regulations. And once we achieve that, we're really making progress, because now we have self-perpetuating smart growth. Okay? Developers don't have to be forced to build smart growth if they can see it's more profitable to build smart growth. So if we build in our communities models of good smart growth projects, we are very powerfully educating citizens, elected officials, and developers in a very self-perpetuating, beneficial way. Very important that we do the models on the ground in our community so people can see it's possible. And what we also want to leverage is envy. We want people to envy the smart growth projects in our town and say, they look at it and they say, I want to live that way too. I'm envious of people who live that way. I want to live that way too, and I want that for myself and my family. We need to leverage envy, because too often in the past, what we're envying is the suburban sprawl lifestyle, you know, the American dream. We need to change that so the envy is directed more towards smart growth in town development that we're all pushing for. Fred Kent, with Project for Public Spaces, tells a really encouraging story. He talks about how he worked with the New Jersey DOT engineers a little while back, and he went to them and said, I want you engineers to design for me a street that's going to be safe for a mom and her child to cross the street. And he was blown away because they just gave him a tidal wave of fantastic, wonderful, progressive tactics for redesigning the street safely. They were giving him stuff like traffic calming and narrowing the street and all kinds of progressive designs that were magnificent. There were wonderful kinds of designs for effectively creating safe crossing for kids and mothers crossing the street. And he was really astonished. And the big message to him was that it's not so much that engineers don't understand the smart growth designs, it's just that they're not being given permission to recommend those designs. Oftentimes, there are elected officials or their supervisors are not giving them permission. What Fred Kent is saying is that if they're given permission, they know what to recommend. They just need to be given permission. And it probably starts back before giving staff permission. It probably goes back to elected officials being given permission by their constituents, the voting citizens. They need to give their elected officials permission to direct their staffs to do smart growth development and smart growth recommendations. So it starts back with citizens as voters. Citizens as voters need to give elected officials permission to call for the smart growth recommendations from the professional staff. So it all starts with the voting citizens. Give permission, give permission. Again, you need to be willing to make enemies if you want to do something meaningful. You need to have the courage and leadership to be willing to make enemies. I know how difficult it is, but it's really important. It's not so much doing these things that I'm recommending, like road diets or whatever, and being really unique and on the cutting edge nationally. Really, what's increasingly happening is that there's so many communities that are doing the smart growth things now that it's more of a matter of jumping on the bandwagon. You know, not missing the boat is more of the concern the community should have now, that if you don't do these smart growth things, you're really falling behind a lot of other places in the community if you're not doing these things. So please think about jumping on the bandwagon to join so many other parts of the country and not thinking that you're really, going out and doing it on your own. There are a lot of other places that are doing this, and it's really a bandwagon kind of thing. Persistence trumps brilliance. Very hard for people like me to accept this, but I think I have accepted this, that persuasive arguments, all the studies and data in the world are much less effective in persuading people than persistence. Persistence is much more likely to result in changes you want to see than being brilliant. I really believe that it's important that the community be inspired by really effective urban design consultants, the high-quality urban design consultants, and I have a list of them on my website if you want to see some of them by name. The quality urban design consultants will give the community the momentum and the inspiration to do the things that are really meaningful in terms of smart growth and a brighter future, with the ability to collect, gather, and condense and summarize and describe what the community's vision is with exciting drawings that can inspire people, drawings that are accessible to people that are not engineers or not planners, people that are not professionals, but people who can understand and get excited when they see the really wonderful drawings that they're calling for in their visions. The urban design consultants that are skilled in creating those visions and drawings are very powerful means of finding the momentum and the will as a community to move in the direction of doing the things that need to be done to improve your community. So I really strongly recommend the concept of using quality urban design consultants. Important to keep in mind that we should not be dumbing down and keeping our visions modest. With time, almost anything is possible. We often squelch ideas by saying, well, we can't do it in a couple of years, so let's not even think about it or propose it. But what I'm saying is that we have to keep in mind that with time, anything is possible. Let's not shrink our vision and make our visions modest and our plans really, really timid, because it doesn't have the power, as Daniel Burnham once said, it doesn't have the power to inspire men's hearts or minds. It's not really a powerful, persuasive mechanism the way big plans are. Big plans can inspire us as a community to do the exciting, necessary things to have a better future. One of my heroes, Enrique Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia, he was elected mayor a while back, and he really did some things to try to move in the direction of making people happy instead of cars. His most famous comment, perhaps for me at least, is that you can make cars happy and you can make people happy, but you can't do both. It's either one or the other. And so understandably so, he's a hero of mine. He really did a lot of effective things to reduce the dominance of cars and really provide a quality of life that created a lot of urban happiness. His citizens were noticeably happier over time. Now initially what happened is that people were outraged. When he started trying to rein in cars, people were just enraged. They tried to throw him out of office. They couldn't stand him. In other words, he made a huge number of vicious enemies. In other words, he was a leader. What happened ultimately is that people were able to see so clearly and obviously that the quality of life had improved so much that he became a hero. He was elected for multiple terms in office as mayor. He was tremendously popular because it was so obvious that Bogota had seen a real improvement in its quality of life. And yet he started off making all those enemies and wanting people to throw him out of office. All right, road dieting. Going from 4 lanes to 3, a very, very common tactic. Going from 4 lanes to 3 delivers a lot of benefits. Which of these two, 4 lanes or 3 lanes, carries more traffic? Well, up to about 25,000 car trips per day, they actually carry about the same amount of traffic. And that's largely because the inside lanes in a 4-lane urban street actually becomes a turn lane when people are waiting to make a left turn. So you lose that as a travel lane when people are waiting to make a left turn, so it actually functions more like a 3-lane than a 4-lane for capacity. 4-lane or 3-lane, which produces more speeding? Well, I think it's fairly obvious that the 4-lane is going to create more speeding, and that's shown in studies. Also, more obvious, perhaps, that the 4-lane produces more crashes. Studies show this. And as you've heard from me earlier, bikes, pedestrians, and businesses are benefited with more modest 3-lane streets than larger, higher speed, more dangerous 4-lane streets. And in fact, these streets are not only seeing, we're not only seeing a large number of communities in America going from 4 lanes to 3 because it's such a no-brainer, essentially, to have all these benefits from going from 4 lanes to 3. A lot of cities are starting to think about starting to actually go from 5 lanes to 3, removing 2 travel lanes. Okay, a really dramatic thing that's actually producing the same kinds of benefits, and so a growing number of cities are actually moving towards 5 to 3 road diets. One size fits all. I'll give you a schematic that illustrates this concept. Downtowns are typically best designed when they're more formal. There's more hardscaping, there's more walkability, there's more compactness, more density. As you move up the transect scale into more suburban locations in areas outside of your downtown, you get more curvilinear patterns. You get more car emphasis, more dispersal. Ultimately, in your top images, you have the rural habitat locations that are even more dispersed, farm locations. Each of these transects have their own land development context standards that are appropriate for delivering high quality for each context zone. Okay? You must have a land development code that is context sensitive, that provides a different set of design regulations for one location, a different set for the middle location, and a different set for the rural location. Rural, suburban, and urban all need their own sets of urban design regulations. One size does not fit all. We need to start thinking about transforming our communities to be less of a car-only, car-happy design, the very conventional commercial suburban sprawl design you see here, to transform it to something that's much more town building, much more likely to encourage walking, much higher quality of life, cars not removed, but cars better behaved and attentive and slower speed, with this kind of design. Okay? It's not all about cars here. Here we're saying that pedestrians are the design imperative. Okay? We're going to focus more on making people happy than making cars happy. We're also seeing a radical shift in how we approach things. Okay? In the past 50 years, these are the kinds of things we did. On-street parking removed, trees removed. We added more travel lanes for safety. Growing sidewalks, growing intersections, and removal of sidewalks. That's what we've been doing a lot of over the past 50 years. Now, the next 50 years, we're doing the opposite. Okay, in each of those categories, we're now starting to do the opposite. 180-degree shift in what we're doing. So, in closing, is this our vision? Where it's all about cars? There's no way to travel except by car. We have no real civic pride. A place where our peripheral natural areas are being steamrolled by suburban sprawl, by people fleeing this kind of awful quality of life. Is this our vision? Is this our future? Or is our future more like this? A future where we have transportation choices, housing choices, seniors and children have transportation independence, independence of travel. We have civic pride. We have a place that we can be proud of. A place where, therefore, we have more in the way of environmental conservation because there's less desire for people to flee into the peripheral locations. My main argument is that we must restore the tradition of designing to make people happy instead of cars. We must restore that tradition, and the two keys are to do what we can to reduce sizes and to ratchet down speeds. Those are the two keys to restoring the tradition. Thank you for your time.